Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this latest edition of Luna's live webinar series, Cured Resin, the Distillate Killer. My name is Joe Goodman, and I'm the Sales Engineering Director here at Luna Technologies. Joining us today is co-founder of Bobsled Extracts, Kyler Buck, and our special guest, Preston Kennedy, owner of the consulting firm VF Laboratories. So I've posted links in the chat-in area to follow us on social, as well as our contact information for more information and website. And a recording will be made available for everyone for future reference via email as well. Make sure you chat in your questions during the webinar. We'll have a live Q&A about 30 minutes at the end of this webinar with both Kyler and Preston. So get those questions in the chat-in area as we roll through the webinar. We'll kick off the webinar today with kind of behind-the-scenes look at some of the post-processing with cured resin. We'll load and unload the IO Extractor, just kind of talk about some quick tips and discussing how to successfully hot swap. You'll go into detail on cured resin 101. Kyler discussed a little bit of the cost savings and product yield benefits of cured resin. And from there, kind of talk a little bit about CO2, why distillate has replaced CO2, and then why we see distillate replacing, BHO replacing distillate. So we'll answer all your questions towards the end, and talk with Preston Kennedy a little bit about his experience getting his start in CO2 and how he has kind of transitioned to BHO for his end product. So from there, we'll kick it off and we'll get things started. I'll pass it over to Kyler in the lab.
Thanks, Joe. As you mentioned, we're here today to talk about cured resin vape carts, and more specifically, why they're better than distillate vape carts. We wanted to start off with showing you how we load a run. Here we have our material. It's been pre-packed in our packer. We pack it into 5-pound pucks, compress them into 5-pound pucks. We have 4 pucks sitting right here. And that just makes it so much easier for the extractor to load and unload and what we call hot swap between runs. Previous to this, there was a lot of manual labor involved in packing and unpacking those columns. And everything we do here at Lunatech is to minimize the downtime and effort and labor between runs. So I'm gonna slide, and this is a 100 micron filter sock that's reusable and keeps all of this biomass inside the sock and out of your system, enabling it to keep much cleaner runs. I have a PTFE clip that I'll be using to seal. Have it clipped and then follow me in. You'll see the loading of the run. The IO is designed to be toolless. We have these handles that can be hand tight, so you don't have to, have tools while you're loading and unloading runs. So this run just got done. I'll pull this one out. Load this guy in. Close the lid. And there you go. Like I said, toolless. These are designed and will maintain your seal by just getting them, snug and hand tight. But you guys saw how easy it is to hot swap. We took the old run out and put the new run in. I'm now going to walk over to our control panel and hit start. Now, message pops up. You have chosen to start an extraction process cycle. Ensure that the reactor lid is properly fastened before proceeding. As you guys saw, we just did that. So I'm going to start the run. You can actually see that the vacuum pump is automatically kicked on. It's pulling a vacuum, and it is going to pull down to the preset negative 29.5, which is pretty much a perfect vacuum. It then turns off the vacuum pump, isolates it, and then does a 60-second safety check where it monitors the pressure and ensures that there's no leak. Right here, we have a system, our other system, and it actually just got done. So this is the distillation complete message. Select acknowledge to end the distillation. If the distillation was ended prematurely, select resume distillation to resume the distillation process. Now, this is obviously, we have the viscosity selector on the IO, so we can choose any consistency or how much solvent is left in on a sliding scale, but it obviously gives you the chance to check the material, look in the distillation pot, and ensure it's the right one. If you see here, I'd like to get you on the home screen, and you can kind of see the whole diagram, our two solvent tanks. We got our reactor, which is the material column, the distillation column, and the solvent pump. Our entire system is recipe driven. So to start a run, you go into the recipe library. We have shatter, live resin, batter, crumble, live resin batter, dry batter, live resin CBD, dry crumble. There's clean runs. Any sort of custom recipe you want to create can be created on the IO Extractor. We also have our dashboard. If you look in here, this actually tells you, how long it took to complete each step in the process, where it is in that process, and so on. We've talked about the equipment. Let's start talking about the product. Over here, I have some cured resin that's been poured out of our machine, and this is pre-purge. So it hasn't gone in the oven yet. And you see that top layer floating around. Sorry for the fogginess we got saran wrap here so no contaminants get in. But you see that top sauce, that's a mixture of solvent, cannabinoids, and terpenes. Since the terpenes are the lightest compound in the product, during the purge process, they settle on the top. So this product is gonna go into the oven next. And I have here some finished product that's been purged. Now you can see the difference here. We have this real dry, nice sugar, and I have this tops HTE layer, which is that layer on top that you've seen, but it's been purged. So there's no solvent left in here, but it has a really high concentrate of terpenes compared to the other cannabinoids. And since I poured those terpenes off, this sugar now has a higher THC content. Now, the difference between this BHO and distillate is the delta 9 aspect. THCA crashes out and crystallizes, where delta 9 stays a solid and more of this liquid form. Which is why in the beginning, BHO carts didn't take off. It took us in the industry a long time to figure out that you actually had to decarb the oil before putting it into the cartridge. Otherwise, back in 2015, 2014, when people started experimenting putting BHO into vape cartridges, the cartridge would actually crash out and crystallize, and you wouldn't be able to consume all the product. Not a good product to put out, which gave really CO2 and distillate the chance to take over the vape pen market. But we're here today to tell you that the process has been figured out, and BHO, whether it's live resin or cured resin, is a better product to consume than distillate. I want to show you these here too. These are terpenes pulled out of our cold trap. So during the purging process of removing all of the solvent, a little bit of the terpenes boiled off as well, but we were able to capture those using a cold trap. This cold trap goes down to negative 105 C and has stainless plate, perforated plates in it that are cooled. They'll actually catch the terpenes and recondense them into a liquid, allowing the solvent to stay as a vapor and be purged out of the product. What's cool is with these two different products, we can add it back into this dry sugar to create any type of consistency or any type of terpene to cannabinoid ratio we want. Obviously, the higher terpene percentage is going to be that higher terpene cart, which is what live resin is. Live resin has higher terpenes, and cured resin has less. Now, to get this down, next step would be to put this in an oven, seal it so that none of the terpenes that are in it can evaporate. We'd melt it down, and I'll show you what the consistency will look like after it's been melted. So you can see here, I have these two jars, one in a Pyrex so you can see the color, and one in a jar right here. But this is this product that has been activated and it's been decarbed. And even though it's a little bit darker in the jar, you can see how light and gold and beautiful those cartridges are. Now, if you're asking why BHO, why not just use distillate? And it's because BHO is not only full spectrum, but it's strain specific, and it's actually a more valuable process to create. By taking this product, say we start with 1,000 pounds of biomass. If we're making distillate with that 1,000 pounds, you get I'm just doing basic math for numbers. You got 1,000 pounds of biomass, you get a 10% yield, you have 100 pounds of oil. Now that to create distillate, that oil needs to be further refined, winterized, have the ethanol purged out, then it goes through either a short path, a wiped film, or a rolled film. And during that process, to get the THC scores you want, you're gonna lose up to 50% of your product. So that 100 pounds is now 50 pounds. And you've lost the full spectrum, you've lost the strain specificness, you now have a purified THC, but really what I consider the crude of the industry. Distillate's crude, BHO is the proper product. Because even like raw distillate, you don't see raw distillate carts sold. No, you got to add terpenes back in. So with this distillate process, you've taken your oil, you've stripped all of the terpenes, you've taken the strain uniqueness out of it, you've created this raw THC oil that you now have to add either botanical terpenes in, the strawberry flavor or the bubble gum, or you spend a little bit extra money to make it a higher quality carton, you add cannabis-derived terpenes in, which are these terpenes right here that I was able to pull out of the cold trap through the BHO process. So as a BHO producer, I actually sell these terpenes to distillate producers so that they can compete with my higher end BHO product. Kind of a weird reverse setup going on. But you now have to add those terpenes back in, and now you have a product that you could create and sell. With BHO, why it's so much easier and so much better is because same deal. We have 1,000 pounds of biomass, you extract it, you have a 10% yield, you now have 100 pounds of oil. But that oil is strain specific and full spectrum. Instead of all the complicated processing steps of turning it into distillate, a lower quality product, we're able to heat this up, decarb it, and not lose 50% of our product, not have to change anything or add anything. We have the same strain specific, high quality product as your live resin vape carts, just a little bit less flavor. You know, instead of those 15 to 20% terpene carts, you have a higher THC, lower terpene, say 5 to 10% cured resin cart. And those are gonna be a better experience, and they're gonna be at really, you know, in the market, it's priced similar to distillate carts, but with a much better margin. Because if you think about the 50 pounds of oil of distillate I have, or the 100 pounds of oil of BHO I have, I get a lot. I didn't lose half of my product. So I'm actually making more money on a simpler step, providing a higher quality cartridge. Now, obviously, you want a little bit of terpenes in your oil, whether it's cured resin or live resin, but lots of cured resin comes out at 5% or above terpenes. So any of those products are nice, but if it doesn't, if say you're a little light on terpenes, during all of this process, I'm saving up and I have natural cannabis derived terpenes that I can add back in to, again, create that any consistency I want. So that's a little bit of the background. I've actually asked a friend of mine and a third-party consultant to come in. I'd like to introduce Preston Kennedy. Now, Preston, can you tell a little bit of yourself, how long you've been in the industry and what you're doing?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Preston Kennedy. I actually own a consulting firm called BF Laboratories. It's based out of Sandy, Oregon. I've been in the industry close to a decade now and served in a multitude of laboratories all across the country. Specialize in optimization of parameters and proven processes to make your products better with doing, more with less, essentially.
Wow. And I'm excited to have Preston here today because I brought him in because we have kind of opposite backgrounds. I started in the industry on the BHO side, and he started with CO2. And I wanted to talk a little bit today about, what happened to CO2, why distillate replaced it, and, why I think that BHO is going to replace distillate like distillate replaced CO2. So, back in 2015, all we saw was CO2 cartridges. Sure. There wasn't distillate yet.
Right,
There's nothing else on the shelf. But how popular of a product today it seems like you've kind of converted more into the BHO consulting. Why is that? What have you seen?
You've made me a true believer, because the laboratory I started out in 2015 in San Diego, we catered to connoisseur demand. Although it was a medical facility, we were still able to make optimized product tailored to consumer demand in the current market. The specialty about that was it allowed me to see it from a first-person approach and really gain knowledge and understanding of the true quality and essences that the entourage effect that you spoke of can provide.
At that point, CO2 carts were really better than distillate carts.
Absolutely, 100%. Especially if they had a high terpene profile to them, or was of the right chemovar.
Yeah.
What I saw in 2015, it was a war. It was clear, versus pure.
Yeah.
The distillate that was out there was being mass produced, and we had a competing product that was clear essentially, but it also had secondary metabolites in it,
Yeah.
such as beta carotene, giving it a dark orange color. That being said, like I said before, clear versus pure. What do you want? Do you want a clear, isolated cannabinoid that only serves as one form of effects that you get from inhalation? Or do you want a more full spectrum, a full body high, a high that you can feel in your feet? That's what we saw back then, and that's what we still,
And I've never really been into the CO2 product, but I agree with Preston. Back then, CO2, since it was full spectrum, was a better quality, consumer experience. But that was because we really hadn't figured out how to put BHO into cartridges successfully yet. But then, with the industry and rec happening, distillate kind of pushed out and kind of won that fight, I'd say, as market share, because of the high THC scores. But, with our cured resin carts, we're still putting out an 80% THC plus product with, 5% terpenes and all, the other minor cannabinoids in as well. So I believe that BHO is kind of do what distillate did to the CO2, which was kind of push that market share out and be recreated. And we've honestly already seen it with edibles too. I'm in Oregon. The top brand in Oregon is actually they use BHO in their edibles, and that's because you get that better, full spectrum experience, full body. And, at Bobsled here, we even make tinctures as well. So we have live resin, we have cured resin, but we're actually able to, whether it's an edible or a tincture, anything that you are putting distillate into your product today can be replaced with a higher quality BHO product. And really, color remediation is a big reason for that, because for so long in our industry, the consumers and customers, they want that really gold oil. And now with the inline color remediation that BHO is producing, you can get the distillate color with the, full spectrum, strain specific experience.
That's always the negative aspect that I experienced. I could have the best terpene profile in the world, but customers would still say, I don't like the taste of CO2 oil.
Yeah.
That's the simple fact that we couldn't remove the beta carotene from it.
Yeah.
It just stayed in there, and no one wants to smoke secondary metabolites.
Yeah.
They only want to smoke those pure natural compounds that actually influence that high that you're talking about and that effect.
Now you have a little bit of experience with the distillate process too. What do you think on, the post-processing and your experience? If you're starting now making distillate, can you tell me the steps involved, like start to finish?
Yeah.
What you're doing?
Sure. Although you might think of it as perfect, nothing is perfect in this world. And, me as a producer, myself, of extracts, nothing comes in the facility as perfect, especially if we're a toll processor.
Yeah.
From what I've seen, we could have a multitude of other compounds in there that would further increase the time it took to make the distillate itself, vice, putting it into a container and sending it on its merry way, and then having readily available oil a few hours later.
Yeah.
Rather than days. That's the first aspect of it.
Yeah. Well, if you could just kind of walk me through,
Sure.
like the production. So whether extracting, let's do CO2 extraction to distillate. Just kind of walk me through. Talk about the winterization, the filtering, and then the steps involved.
Sure. So we would extract the whole plant material. and then we would take the crude and we would mix it with the ethanol solution,
Yeah.
and then we would go through the process.
Now the CO2 oil you'd be mixing with ethanol.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of always what kind of threw me off with CO2 is they claim, you know, that it's
You're
so
100%
safe and
correct.
it's, you know, the CO2 out of the air,
Yeah.
but to get it into a product that's consumer ready, you gotta add ethanol into it. And why are you adding ethanol to it?
to simply remove the unwanted compounds. People can't smoke concentrates with fats and waxes in it. You'll get lipid pneumonia. It'll go from vapor to solid phase in your lungs.
Yeah.
And you'll end up drowning yourself, essentially.
So, you're talking about fats and waxes.
Yes, sir.
You add ethanol in
Yep.
to what people are calling winterizing, and that's in the ethanol solution. The CO2 devolved into it. The fats and waxes will actually solidify,
Sure.
and you can filter that out.
And it's a 3-day bottleneck on its own.
Really?
Yes, and you can filter it out, but there's lies the problem of residual solvents. You claim it's a safe medicine, but you're adding a toxic chemical to it to remove the fats and waxes.
Yeah.
So
And then so now you filtered it out. How do you remove the ethanol?
So you would take it and then further refine that product into a solution and remove the ethanol with a rotary evaporator.
Okay, or people have the falling film too. If it's a little bit higher, you know, they have a little bit higher throughput than the falling film, but that's expensive equipment.
Right.
And then after it comes out of the rotovape or the falling film, you then put it in, use a short path or a wipe film?
Well, we can use a wiped film evaporator.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, you just want it to go from point A to point B and be done. With SPD, essentially, you would have to go through more processes, remove the heads and tails fraction, vice putting it into one area and having it spat out and as a finished product in another area. There's just too many steps involved.
Well, I mean, all of it sounds like a lot of steps.
Yeah.
But with the wipe film, do you just run it through once, or do you mentioned
You have to go through more
stripping
refinement
your terpenes?
processes. Yes,
so
absolutely.
will you walk me through that process, what that is?
So you would take your crude material that you would remove your ethanol from, and you would load it into your distillation machine. That would send it through, but you have to change your parameters first. You're going to want to strip unwanted compounds, such as the solvents, if there were any left in there, and the terpenes.
How come you can't just run it through that doesn't do it, or I guess all the compounds would just end up back in your distillate
There's
if you didn't
absolutely
separate it?
just too many unwanted compounds in there for it to be a viable product.
Okay.
Distillate is a refined product, and you have to go through vigorous steps to get to that. To achieve 99% potency, it's, hey, how many molecules can we pull out of here? How many compounds can we remove out of here just to get it to delta 9 THC?
Yeah.
Or a testable cannabinoid.
Yeah.
For that matter.
And then the range that you see, distillate, I mean, I've seen a lot of different distillate, but I really rarely see it, 92, 95, really never over 95, but 82 to 90, would you say that's kind of the the range?
That's a fair assumption, correct.
Yeah. And that's just kind of why I wanted to talk about it is, with BHO, you can get 80% THC. Obviously, it's strain dependent, but, I would say between our average is, 70 to 85%. I've seen it as high as 95%, though, the same as distillate, right out of the machine, skipping all of those post-processing steps required.
Right.
And it's not only post-processing steps, which is more labor intuitive, but it's also multiple sets of expensive equipment to achieve that throughput.
Absolutely.
The IO can process 400 pounds a day of material, and that comes out finished product only needing to purge the product to continue. So it's, I mean, all of these reasons why cured resin is such a valuable product. And we wanted to focus on cured resin today because the industry is now, it's live resin, they know about it. But I don't want anyone looking past the benefits of cured resin, which is such a higher volume product. And again, like live resin, you're only getting a 3 or 4% yield. With cured resin, you're more averaging the 12 to 20% yield. So, you know, you get more volume of oil per run you're doing, and you got more oil to sell, which means more money. And it's a high quality product. Now, I want to talk about really the difference between that live resin and cured resin. We talked about the yields, but really the product, you know, the cured resin is going to have your higher THC and lower terpenes. Your live resin is going to have still a good amount of THC, but more terpenes. And terpenes, there's a big misconception out there in the market that, you know, THC, that's what gets you high. And it definitely helps and is needed, but terpenes interact with the THC and create that awesome experience. You can, whether it's flower or concentrates, I can get way more, you know, enlightened off of a oil that has 60% THC with 20% terpenes versus, you know, even distillate or even isolate by itself. I'm gonna get a better experience. And I feel like, you know, any educated consumer would agree with that point as well. Another big difference is obviously the price point. And there's room in the industry for both. This is going to be that higher price point, lower volume sales, and this is going to be the lower price point, higher volume. But again, a much better product than distillate. And I think, Preston, really, I gave you some of these cartridges to sample out and try, and
that was when I became a believer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, CO2, distillate, or BHO? What's your favorite cart?
It's the live resin.
Live resin.
BHO cart.
Well, obviously live resin, but that cured resin is the distillate killer.
Yeah. Throughout the webinar. Feel free to chat in more. We'll try to get into as many of them as we can. But we'll jump over to Kyler and Preston here. Again, thank you guys for joining us. Preston, thank you for coming in today.
Thank you.
We'll kick things off. So this question is for both of you guys. How, and we answered it somewhat in the webinar, but more specifically, we had some specific questions come in around decarboxylate, the oil with the BHO. So if both of you guys could just answer that question, how do you decarboxylate BHO?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously you decarboxylate with heat. You want to do a like low and slow decarboxylation process to avoid degrading as much terpenes as possible. So really that 180 degree Fahrenheit temperature, and then really from like really 12 to 24 hours, you know, depending on the volume of material you're using and the temperature. Another thing you want to do is definitely put it in a sealed container, preferably removing the atmosphere to prevent oxidization and backfilling with nitrogen. But that will allow you to, for any of the terpenes that would evaporate, it actually traps the terpenes with the oil.
You can also charge your CVO ovens with an inert gas in case that jar were to fail, and add a secondary means of risk mitigation to save your product.
Yeah, so I mean, we're even if you got the right oven set up and you can back purge your ovens with nitrogen, you can do it all just in the oven. So yeah, again, people say they normally decarb at 250, 300 degrees. And that's to achieve that 30-minute to an hour decarboxylation process. You start to degrade terpenes at really 200 and above. So doing it at 180 allows you to still decarb and activate that THC, but it takes longer to do so.
And it will also supersaturate those terpenes. If your jar is completely sealed tight, the terpenes won't be able to escape from the jar. So the heat will make them grow in potency over the course of 12 to 18 days, however long you have your concentrate inside the atmospheric conditions.
Yeah, and it's 12 to 18 hours. Yeah.
Perfect. So that answers the questions that we had around, what specifically the temperature and how long. The questions that we're getting in are concerning the terpene loss. So, this question is for Kyler specifically. Do you lose terpenes in the decarb process?
You can lose, it's a little tiny bit degrade, but if you do it properly, you can really preserve all of the terpenes, and that oil will still smell incredible and taste incredible. Another thing on that is it depends on how you want to, separate those terpenes in the beginning. So if you are crashing your THCA out first, you can actually pour off the terpenes, separate them, heat up just the THCA, and then add the terpenes back on after the THCA's already been decarbed and activated.
Perfect. So this question is for Preston here. How does, obviously coming from CO2 and working with distillate, how does BHO extraction compare to distillate when it comes to creating that entourage effect?
Yeah, it's this synergy of compounds. Basically what I was talking about, those secondary metabolites that are wanted in your extract. 6 groups, cannabinoids, terpenoids, flavonoids, you've got stilbenoids, lignans, and alkaloids, all of which are compromised within that trichome head itself. With CO2 extract, you have other unwanted compounds such as, xanthil, chlorophyll, and beta carotene. Well, how BHO compares to distillate in that CO2 oil is it just doesn't have those unwanted compounds that will compromise that final integrity of the entourage effect. You've got everything that's a part of that plant inside that concentrate. It generates an orchestra, and with that orchestra, you create a symphony. It's just not one. It's not one band member like distillate is.
Yeah, and that's you talk about full spectrum and the entourage effect. Distillate doesn't have all of those things that go into what makes it full spectrum. You're trying the best you can to isolate and increase the THC potency, and you're losing a lot of those minor cannabinoids and completely losing those terpenes. And the terpenes, are what make the strain specific.
Perfect. So specifically for you, Kyler, how do you avoid oxidation in the oil itself?
Yeah, so the oxidization happens when the oxygen interacts with the heat and can cause the oil to actually start to amber up. Or if you've ever looked at your cartridge and you've seen like a slightly darker layer on the top, or you can see where it looks like it's burning around the wicking holes that it goes in. And to avoid the oxidization best you can while you're decarbing that oil, if you remove the atmosphere and and then, especially it helps to backfill with nitrogen, you're gonna slow down that oxidization process, and much less likely gonna have that oxidization happening in the carts. And if you've ever seen it before, it's that top kind of amber layer on a nice yellow gold cart. It'll kind of have a amber layer on top. So to avoid that, you remove the oxygen before heating. And I don't know if you have anything you want to add on that.
Oh, you could even maybe modify your own system to have it run point A to point B via inline injection. Have it run through a tube and never hit oxygen. They make these sealed jars to where you can retrofit equipment to make it to where the concentrate will flow through the tubing and just enter the inert jar itself, and that will create less exposure to oxygen, slowing down that rapid oxidation that happens to the concentrate. You want to influence reduction. You want to retain those electrons during your post-processing processes, and not lose them essentially. So
awesome. So general question for either of you guys: what is the reason for the decarb?
So for the decarb, again, the difference between distillate and what makes it work so well in a cartridge is it's been activated and it's Delta 9. THCA, in the industry, there's diamonds, there's sugar. Like the THCA sugars and crystallizes. And that's really what happened back in the day when people were loading BHO into cartridges. They were sugaring up, nucleating, and crystallizing in the cartridge to where it just gets stuck on the side of the windows and become foggy and not be able to be consumed. By heating it up, you're converting the THCA to Delta 9, which doesn't have that crystallization happening. And that's really what makes it work. And it's just, about cannabis being a new industry. There's these techniques where, the industry's learning together. And if it was common knowledge in 2014, really, 2013 even, people would have been using BHO cartridges from the start. It just took, this many years in the industry to, connect the dots between, why distillate was working in the cartridge versus the BHO. Really started with the live resin carts, because live resin being the highest, one of the highest quality tasting oils out there, everyone wanted it to get into the cartridge. So it just took that long. But yeah, it will not work in a cartridge unless you decarb it and activate it to Delta 9.
And I want to touch base on the primarily the oxygen removal during said decarboxylation, because like we said, the isomeric conversion will happen, and you won't just be converting to Delta 9, you'll be converting to other unwanted isomers such as CBN and CBC. You want as much Delta 9 potency in those cured resin or live resin cartridges as possible. So remove that catalytic converter and you won't have that problem. Inert spaces is what you want. So
perfect. So I might be bouncing. We've got a ton of questions coming in. Might be bouncing around a little bit with you guys, so I appreciate you bearing with me. But next question: is it best to run very cold with cured, or is it acceptable to run warm?
Yeah, no. You definitely want to run your BHO extraction process as cold as possible, pretty much always. And actually, with these cured resin and making cartridges specifically, the fats and waxes are really bad. Not only to consume, but it'll actually cause like the oil to go cloudy. So doing a very cold extraction to inline de-wax and, inline during the extraction process, you can hold all those fats and waxes back. And specifically with the Luna and how it operates, and is a jacketed reactor, that you're doing, like a -60 soak. And that soak is even important because it's allowing the solvent to soak with the biomass and really give the chance for those fats and waxes to truly solidify. That's why we want to do at least like a 20-minute soak at the -60 temperature to get those fats and waxes back. And not only does it help with that, but then also color.
Selective extraction temperatures.
If you're
at a certain range, then you're just not going to be pulling those unwanted compounds like you would with other extraction methods.
Yeah, at the warmer temperature, you're going to be pulling a lot of chlorophyll.
Yeah.
Perfect. So, general question: wouldn't you need to reintroduce terps due to the decarb process?
You just really want a hot plate with a magnetic stir is one of the easier routes. I mean, if you don't have that, you can technically, hand mix it, but having a hot plate with a magnetic stir, dropping the magnet in, introducing the terps, and just anything that can homogenize the oil properly will be good.
Perfect. So what are the ideal characteristics of cured material for BHO extraction?
Cold and dark. If you keep it refrigerated, you got to think about this here. Your three main enemies are light, oxygen, and heat. So if you keep your input material cold and stored properly, then you're not going to, have any worries, and you're going to retain optimal characteristics for your input material.
Yeah, I mean, just proper storage of the biomass is very important to the extraction process. Obviously, if you just throw it into a black garbage bag in a corner and it's the summer and it's hot and it's getting cold and it's getting wet, or all these things, like obviously the freshest material, the fresher the material it is, the higher quality it's going to be. Not only for the terpene retention, because terpenes are highly volatile, so they just evaporate normally with time, but it also, time is what allows the chlorophyll to start breaking down. So extracting it as fresh as possible is preferred, but if you can't do that, like Preston mentioned, properly storing the material, you could even, store it in vacuum sealed bags where you remove all that oxygen, which creates problems that we've been talking about from the beginning. So yeah, properly stored and fresh.
I've even seen bags filled with nitrogen too.
Yeah.
For proper shelf life stability. And those bags lasted 6 months on the shelf before I got to them, extraction wise. And I've opened it up and it was just phenomenal. It's just like a 2-week-old plant. So,
yeah, if you store the material right, you can, even 8 months later, you can still get good processed material. And a lot of people freeze the dried material too, to store it. So
perfect. So I think this question is in reference to the back oven and nitrogen, but at what pressure do you back pressure with nitrogen?
Well, really, it's just ensuring that there's no atmosphere. Right. So by using the oven and pulling the vacuum down to -29, you're going to remove all that atmosphere, and then you would just backfill to 0 pressure. Some ovens can hold a little bit of a positive pressure, like 1 or 2 psi, but really just getting it, refilling it back. It's just to ensure that there's no oxygen. It's less a pressure thing.
Yeah, I like to do quick charges, like opening the bottle, maybe 1/8 of a turn, maybe for 1 to 2 seconds at an interval of 3 times. So you can see the inch pounds go down to 20 and then go back up and then go back down and then go back up. And then you should have all the oxygen removed. I haven't seen any negative attributions to that in post-processing wise.
Perfect. So this question is specifically for Kyler. How do you purge your THE sauce of solvent?
Could you repeat that?
How do you purge your HTE sauce of solvent?
So whether it's HTE, any of my BHO products, I'm using a purging oven. So, and depends on, you know, how thick the oil is in the vessel, whether it's, you know, shatter on parchment or, you know, in a jar. I might, you know, change and lengthen the time of day. Obviously, the thicker and more volume of oil I have, the longer it has to be in the oven to purge. But, you know, I use a vacuum oven typically between, depending on material, it's between 85 degrees and 105 degrees, and typically between 24 and 36 hours.
Perfect. So do you need to winterize the oil?
That is, again, it depends on the equipment you're using. If you do a winterization, you know, I would do it with a hydrocarbon like butane. You don't want to winterize with ethanol, but if you have, because with ethanol, you're going to be stripping a lot of the terpenes out and it's going to be counterintuitive. But if you have the proper extraction equipment like a Lunatech, running the right recipe, it's all going to come out dewaxed in line.
Perfect. So just a general question here. First, we touched on live resin vape carts and cured resin vape carts. What is the difference?
So, I mean, the difference is going to be your starting material. Live resin comes from fresh frozen material. So, and fresh frozen material isn't like, you know, it was dried, then immediately frozen. What fresh frozen is it was cut down in the field and then never dried, immediately frozen, preferably flash frozen. And what that does is it allows the terpenes to not evaporate. If you've ever been around drying, you know, cannabis, depending on the volume, I mean, it reeks the whole block up, you know. That smell you're smelling in the air is those valuable high dollar terpenes just evaporating and getting wasted to the atmosphere. By freezing it, you're actually able to capture all of those terpenes and extract it in the extraction process. So that's what makes live resin, or fresh frozen. And they called it live resin because it, you know, smells exactly and tastes exactly like the plant was when it was in the field, you know, right during harvest, which is the, you know, the best way it can be. Cured material and cured resin is from the, you know, cured resin. It's been cured in a drying room and then properly dried, then extracted. But of course, it's going to have less terpenes because during that drying process, those terpenes evaporated.
Perfect. So leading into next question here, how does the cold trap work?
The cold trap works in line. You put it on the vacuum ovens between the pump and the oven. And depending on what temperature cold trap you have, we actually run two in line, a negative 50 C and a negative 105 C. And that is, you know, because while you're pulling the solvent out of and purging it out of the oil, some of the terpenes can escape as well because they're highly volatile. But what it does is it capture those terpenes on the path to the pump, and it actually recondenses the terpenes into a liquid and allows the solvent to get passed through and pushed out, and it collects the terpenes in the trap. And again, like if you're making vape carts and you're processing a good volume of oil, not only do the cold traps, you know, extend the life of your solvent pump or your vacuum pump for your oven, but it will pay for itself just in those terpenes that you're able to collect and then reintroduce into your product.
Awesome. Kyler, you talked about terpene percentage in the oil. What percentage of terpenes do you want and why?
Yeah, so the terpenes, the reason why you only want, you know, you wouldn't want to put like oil with 1% terpenes in the vape pen
because it's just going to be too thick to burn smoothly. The terpenes actually allow the viscosity of the oil to be thinner and allow it to burn more smoothly, because it actually needs to be absorbed, into the wick and then inhaled and vaporized. If it's too thick and doesn't have enough terpenes, that oil will be too thick and you're going to burn your coil before oil replenishes on there. So having at least, that 5% mark of terpenes in the oil, and obviously you just test the oil you have before loading it into vape carts to do that. But then also, again, with that's what's great about BHO and the flexibility, being able to pour the top sauce off. Even so, if you have a lower quality or lower terpene oil, you could concentrate some of those terpenes and mix it back in with a certain portion to increase those terpenes so it was vape pen ready. Or, the cold trap terpenes, adding those in. But, if from cured material, 5 to 10% terpenes is great. And then obviously I've seen higher, but usually higher is with live resin, which, I've seen cartridges up with like 23% terpenes. And then at some point, it almost gets there's too much terpenes, where it's actually can get a little harsh because it's so much flavor. So that's why you want to be aware of the terpenes. And I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
No, it's just basically what he said is defining what is a solid versus what is a liquid. You've got a mixture versus a solution, and you as the operator can dictate that by adding, your amount of terpenes that you desire.
Yep.
Just a general question here: why does the solvent doesn't mix with the terps in the cold trap? Question mark. How do you separate them?
So in the cold trap, the solvent is more volatile, so it actually doesn't recondense. So it's able to go through at the temperatures we're using. The solvent doesn't go through, but you do actually have to use a separatory funnel in there, because what you are capturing, you're mixing water. Since you're so cold and you're pulling atmosphere in the oven, the terpenes are going to have water mixed in, and it's a simple like separatory funnel. You just pour it out, and you'll actually see I forget if it's the water on the top or the terpenes on the top.
It's water. Water's on the bottom and terpenes are on top.
Yeah. So the water's on the bottom, and it'll be like, it's water and oil. They don't mix. So you just pour the water out first, and then close it off, separate the jar, and then you got your terpenes. So
and the amounts, the ratios of terpene to solvent when it's actually going in that oven, it's minuscule. I mean, the amount of solvent in there is minuscule. So again, the boiling point of that oven, the temperature will create that boiling point of butane, which is much more lower than terpenes. So You're not even boiling off terpenes, you're only boiling off solvent. And by that cold trap being there, those terpenes are actually being able to recondense. So the butane is saying bye-bye in the first, few seconds of the process, while terpene retention is in place.
Perfect. So this came up in a couple of different areas. I think this is the best question to ask. But do you need to crash out the THCA and separate the terpenes before you decarb?
So that's a great question. The short answer is no. You can actually just do the entire mixture, decarb it, and load it in. Obviously, depending on your terpene percentage of the oil when it comes out, but you'll know if the oil has lots of terpenes, immediately by the layer of terpenes that are on top. So the short answer being no, you can just scoop it all into a jar and heat it up and decarb it. But you will get a higher quality product if you do crash the THCA out first heat it up separately, then add the terpenes back in. So if, again, it just depends on your SOPs and what works best for you as a company, but both ways work. But crashing out THCA and getting the isolate form of it, and then having your HTE sauce separated is going to give you a higher quality product when you decarb and melt down that isolate and then pour those terpenes back on, because those terpenes never got introduced to heat and didn't have ever any chance of degradation. So both work. One is more labor intensive, which is why it, usually is a higher price point on the shelf. So again, like, do you want more labor, higher price point, higher end product, or less labor, bulk volume, big seller, lower price point?
Anecdotal data comes into play too. You got to keep record of which cultivars perform well and which ones don't. There are some monoterpene versus sesquiterpene, essentially, various trichome head types. There are just some strains out there, cultivars that just will not crystallize well. So keeping optimal sets of data is primarily key as well.
Yeah.
Perfect. So we are at 12 o'clock. I'm going to ask one more question here. We'll run a little over. So how come the solvent doesn't recondensate at -40 and -105?
I don't have it's because of the boiling points, and it's how quickly it's passing through. It's not like it's spending a lot of time in there.
And the initial time it took to get from A to B, it's already degrading and volatilizing in the oven. So it's not there by the time it reaches the cold trap. Only the terpenes are.
The solvent definitely passes through the cold trap and goes out the pump. But it just does it at those temperatures, at the speed that it's traveling through. You don't have the solvent doesn't get in the terpenes.
All right, perfect. I guess one more question here for Preston. Do you think butane extraction is more efficient than CO2 extraction, coming from operating CO2 equipment for years?
It's processing capabilities and throughput. It's 18 pounds a day versus 18 pounds an hour. So that's a no-brainer.
And that's BHO is the faster one.
BHO, yes, being the faster one, correct. Thank you.
Right. All right, one more here. Sorry, Kyler. What parameters are used in purging the HTE?
So HTE is going to have the higher terpene content. So I would run at the 80 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit, and then again, it depends on the volume of oil that you're purging. Obviously, if it was spread out onto a piece of parchment and very thin, I can purge for a shorter amount of time, as little as 12 hours. But if it was in a Pyrex and an inch thick, I'd want to purge for, at least 36 hours, maybe even 48. So those SOPs you figure out as time goes on, and there's, of course, different variables. If you heat higher temperatures, you can purge shorter. Lower temperatures, you purge longer. So, you kind of figure out what works best, but that's a good starting point.
Perfect. All right. Well, again, thank you guys for joining us. We got a lot of questions that didn't get answered here today. We will follow up with everyone here and get those questions answered for you. I just want to thank Kyler and Preston for joining us today for Cured Resin, the Distillate Killer. Just been a pleasure to give you another look under the hood here at Luna Technologies. We hope you guys found the information here both informative and worthwhile. Please stay tuned via Instagram, LinkedIn, or Facebook, as we'll be announcing more webinars to come. Next in the lineup, we're going to be doing a webinar with Lunatech's new BHO extractor, the Oberon. So keep an eye out for that. So until next time, from all of us here at Luna Technologies, Bobsled Extracts, and VF Laboratories. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.